For Kelby's intro, we decided to list our favorite things about him.
He knows every gosh darn thing about every gosh darn car in the whole gosh darn world.
He thinks he knows the words to every song.
But when you turn the radio off, it's like hubba-da, hubba-da, hubba-da.
He used to be a baddie, but then he got elected to C3.
He really rows my boat.
Kelby's the only vegetarian I know who eats cheeseburgers.
Kelby's the jolliest guy I know.
Kelby, thank you for being my #1 guy and enduring every chick flick with me and never complaining. Thank you for not getting mad when I prioritize my cat over you. Good luck on your speech.
Kelby, thank you for being the best roommate I could ask for. I can talk about anything with you, and I truly appreciate that. Thanks for being an awesome brother. I love you.
To the last speaker of today's assembly,
Kelby Wittenberg.
Most people don't consider taking action on an issue unless it affects them directly. It's easy to see why. Why should you put the effort towards changing something if it doesn't affect you? It often takes a personal experience to make a person realize how little is being done about a societal problem. Only then do individuals become people that advocate for something they previously didn't care about. This happened to me just last year. I had a friend tell me that she had been sexually assaulted. It changed me, and that's when I started noticing the problems our society has with consent and rape culture. When speakers stand on this stage and address problems about rape culture and sexism, the majority of the speakers tend to be female. When the occasional man stands here and addresses these very same issues, I've noticed that they seem to get more attention and people find what they've talked about more memorable. This is a problem and but one symptom of the sexism in our society. My voice should not be more important because I am a man, but while it is treated that way, I would like to use my unearned privilege to further equity. We all have a role in rape culture, and part of my role is challenging it and encouraging you all to dismantle it. Today, I will use my privilege to talk about 2 specific variables that perpetuate rape culture: consent and how we treat victims of assault. Consent. It's a 7-letter word that can change someone's life forever. Consent. It's the permission for something to happen. The word consent can be applied to many different situations, but here I will be talking about how it relates to sexual activity between 2 people. Consent must be present between both people in order for their actions not to be classified as sexual assault. Consent must be clear, and both parties must make it explicit to the other what they are consenting to. There is no loophole, no trick, no confusion about what is clear consent. Yes means yes, and no means no. If you have not gotten the consent for something, you do not have the permission for it. If you're not sure what your partner wants, you can't proceed. The boundaries for what is consent should be crystal clear. If your partner can't say yes, then it isn't a yes. If your partner says yes, then no, it isn't a yes. If your partner says nothing, it isn't a yes. You need a yes. On the other hand, no does not mean convince me. A no is a no, and that's final. The reason I'm so clearly outlining these guidelines is because I don't want you to be that person who causes the pain and suffering my friend had to go through. It is devastating to see someone who is so bright and confident stripped of those characteristics because of the irresponsible and thoughtless disrespect and disregard of what it means to control your own body. The discussion around consent and supporting victims of assault needs to start earlier in life. Often, adults worry that teenagers need to be educated about consent before they go off to college. But I'd like to push back on this point and say that this is something that needs to be taught starting in middle school. Statistics show females aged 16 to 19 are 4 times more likely than the general population to be victims of rape, attempted rape, or sexual assault. This problem only gets worse as kids go off to college. You might not know just how severe this problem is. A study published by the Bureau of Justice Statistics concluded that 20 to 25% of college women are victims of sexual assault during their 4 years of schooling. Men experience sexual violence in college too, although the likelihood that it will occur is much lower, about 1 in 18 compared to 1 in 5 for women. This needs to change, and I believe it can start with better consent education during high school. Starting in 9th grade, and maybe even early as 8th grade, it needs to be taught how imperative it is that consent is present in all personal encounters. There needs to be mandatory courses every year of high school, reminding kids what constitutes assault. At points when I've walked SPA's hallways, I've heard female-identifying members of my class at points voice interest in limiting their college search to all women's colleges in order to lower their chance of being raped. Is this really how women should be choosing their education, on the basis of how likely they are to be assaulted? Something that also needs to change is how we support victims of sexual assault. The Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network reported that only 20% of female student victims aged 18 to 24 reported their assault to law enforcement. The most common reason for not reporting an assault was because women thought that they would be punished. Right now, our culture asks too much about the victim, like what they were wearing and where they were. It leads to a cycle of second-guessing and self-doubt that leaves the victim sullen that they had not acted or dressed differently. For men that are victims, it is too often the case that their story won't be heard, believed, or taken as seriously because it doesn't seem manly for men to be raped. We need to better support these victims so that they feel comfortable enough to take action against those that have seriously impacted their lives. Victims are often ashamed to report something so personal because they think no one will believe them, that their names will be dragged through the mud, and because they worry that their past will be used against them. This is absolutely not acceptable, and we need to change the stage on which these victims speak so that they don't feel like what they experienced wasn't that important. Currently, we're living in a society that is struggling and failing to correct its mistakes of the past. It seems like every week, another celebrity is accused of acting inappropriate around others. If anything, this shows how profound an impact we can have on another's life if we aren't considerate of what they want. Many of these cases brought in the public spotlight contain events that happened years ago, but the victims still choose to act because of how it affected their lives. The court cases that we're familiar with are only plastered across mainstream media because they involve the rich and famous. Just a couple weeks ago, the nation watched as Dr. Ford was mercilessly blamed for being a victim with no actual consequence for a new Supreme Court justice. There are countless other lawsuits filed by ordinary people that go unnoticed that contain the exact same accusations. Additionally, there are far, far more incidents of sexual assault that are not in the judicial system or even reported. But while we try to fix the past, we must also look forward to the future. How can we prevent this from happening 50 to 60 years down the line? We have to stop it now. Things like the Me Too movement are good first steps, but now we need to take victims' experiences into account and learn from them. So, how can you, as a single person, begin to tackle such a monster of a problem? 1, educate yourself on what affirmative consent is. A clear yes is the only thing that is sufficient enough for consent. Then, educate everyone else that you can reach. Push back on behavior in any form that undermines the message that basic decency and respect require the understanding that no one else is entitled to anyone else's body. 2, when victims come to tell you such a private piece of information, do everything you can to support them. They need to understand that it wasn't their fault, because it is never someone's fault that another person chose to disrespect and violate them in such a horrific manner. And 3, when someone is assaulted, understand that the same society that fosters an environment in which 20% of women will be assaulted is the same society that will attack, disparage, and dismiss them when they come forward. Recognize that. Recognize that and honor the courage, strength, and fortitude it takes to speak out in spite of this reality. So, if someone does confide in you, the least you can do is listen and believe them.